So let's talk about what's happening in Washington state. I actually did a story on this just a few weeks ago, but this is really exciting. In Washington state recently, the governor has now signed into law a bill that makes clergy members mandatory reporters when it comes to being aware of abuse. And the way this works is if you're a public school teacher, for example, and a student who trusts you and likes you comes up to you and says something bad is going on at my home, my father is abusing me, if you're a teacher, you cannot just sit on that information. Even if you are breaking the trust of the student, you have to go tell a social worker at the school. You have to go tell someone else in the building who can take that information and do something with it. Like, the secrecy and the bond you have built with somebody else doesn't matter. You're a mandated reporter. You have to report what you know about this, because the last thing anyone wants to see happen is for that child to continue being a victim. Well, for a long time, Catholic priests were not mandated reporters. And specifically, they said, what if we're in the confessional booth and someone comes in because they're feeling really guilty and they say, Father, I have sinned. I have been doing these horrible things to a child, and I'm going to keep doing them. I know that sounds outlandish, but it has happened. And what do you do if you're a priest? Traditionally, the Catholic rule is that whatever happens in confession stays in confession. A priest cannot do anything with that information other than tell you, say these prayers and, you're forgiven or something like that. And so the question is, well, if they have knowledge that a child is getting abused, they should not be allowed to just sit on that information. And the Catholic Church, by and large, has said, hey, we didn't say that. You can totally make priests mandatory reporters, just like teachers and social workers and all of that. You can make them mandatory reporters as long as it's not in the confessional booth. If they happen to be in the church and someone talks to them, that's one thing. But if an abuser goes into the confessional booth and says this stuff, you cannot make the priest divulge that information. And that seems like a pretty convenient loophole, because what the Catholic Church is basically doing is saying, we created our own rule that allows abusers to get to feel less guilty about themselves if they confess to what they're doing, not on this side of the church, but on this side where the little box is. Then it's fine. You could say whatever horrible things you want, and we're not going to hold it against you. And in Washington state, for years, they've been trying to make priests mandated reporters. And, for years, the compromise was that, okay, clergy can be mandated reporters, but not in the confessional booth, because the Catholic Church has rules about that. But the bill they just passed in Washington state says, we don't care if this happens in confessional. Priests are mandated reporters, period. And if they sit on information and we find out they've been sitting on information that could have protected a kid, they could go to jail, or they could have to pay a fine of up to like $5,000. So that is the law that is now signed in the state of Washington. And guess who's upset about that? Catholic Church, yes, but also the Trump Department of Justice, which now says they're going to launch an investigation into the state. Unbelievable. Let me give you a little bit of background on this. So the law that was passed says priests are mandated reporters. It does not mean, however, that priests have to testify in court about anything they heard. They just have to tell law enforcement, or someone in their church who can tell law enforcement, any knowledge about ongoing sexual abuse. Now, the way the critics have responded to this is by saying, well, the way the law is written, we think it's unfair because, attorneys have attorney-client privilege and doctors have doctor-patient confidentiality. So if someone tells those professions that they're doing something wrong, those professions are not obligated to tell anybody. They're allowed to have some confidentiality. And we think you're picking on us because we're religious. But as articles have said over and over, that's not actually what's happening. Check this out over here. Domestic violence advocates, therapists, and unions are all groups that have privileged communications under state law, but they already lose that privilege in child abuse cases, and they still must follow mandatory reporting laws. Doctors can also be called to testify during judicial proceedings of child abuse cases. Clergy, meanwhile, still do not have to testify in court during such cases. So in some ways, this bill that has just been signed into law, while all these Catholic leaders are saying, you're treating us worse than doctors, you're treating us like they get special privilege, but we don't, it's actually the opposite. In some ways, doctors have to do stuff that priests don't have to. The other thing that doesn't make sense about this argument that, doctors and lawyers get treated differently than we do is that, what do you want? Let's say there was a law that said, guess what? No confidentiality. If anyone learns about abuse, everyone's a mandated reporter. So doctors are not exempt. Lawyers are not exempt. If that happened, do you think for a second the Catholic Church would say, oh, well, okay, if all of us are not exempt, then I guess anything we hear in confession can be told to law enforcement? Do you think they would suddenly give up on the whole confession is sacred and we can't reveal anything? No, of course they wouldn't. So this argument that we're getting treated worse than doctors is BS, because even if they were treated exactly the same, even though their jobs are very different, it's not like they would be okay with this. But this is what they are arguing against. Just to skip ahead a little bit here, because I've said a lot of this before, what the Catholic Church is now arguing is that this law requires some priests who learn about abuse, it requires them to do something that goes against their religious faith. And because confession is such a sacred thing, if you violate something that is so sacred in the Catholic faith, that's like saying, oh, a priest had sex with a woman. We're not supposed to do that. And if you do that, you don't get to be a priest anymore. You're excommunicated. Even though tons of priests do that and they have families outside the church and it's a whole thing and they never get kicked out. But the argument is, how dare this law make us do something that goes against our religious faith? Well, as one of the advocates who fought for this bill said during a hearing about it, she said it's ironic that the church will excommunicate a good priest if he reports child sexual abuse learned of in confession, even though they rarely take action against priests who are predators themselves. Like, the only people who have to worry about the privacy of their confessions in this case are people who are hurting children. We should not be making any compromises to make those people feel any better, right? It's a simple ethical question. If someone tells you they are actively abusing a child and you have the power to stop it, would you do something to stop it? I feel like any decent person would say, yeah, I'll do anything I need to do to make sure that never happens again. But Catholic priests are like, I need to think about it. I need to decide which part of the church I found that out in. And if it's this part, then I'm just going to let the kid keep getting hurt, because we're the Catholic Church. We're very ethical. Thankfully, Democrats in the state of Washington have better ethics than the Catholic Church, because they say, no, it's never okay to sit on that secret, so we're going to make you report it. One of the bishops of the Archdiocese of Seattle, Frank Schuster, he said during the hearings, it would be impossible for a priest to comply with this bill because the penalty for breaking that seal of confession is excommunication. That's the biggest thing priests have to worry about, getting excommunicated. Now, what's the biggest thing a victim of child abuse has to worry about? It's the child abuse. But the priests are very upset they'll lose their costume. In no rational world is getting excommunicated a worse thing than letting a child continue to suffer sexual abuse. What is wrong with you? And if you would rather protect priests than kids, then your organization should at least admit we don't give a shit about the safety of children. That same bishop, by the way, he said, you guys, don't worry, I have a compromise. If a priest is hearing about abuse in confession, they can just tell the offenders to turn themselves in. And it's like, that doesn't make anything better. That's not what happens. If I tell Pete Hegseth to stop drinking on the job, he's not just going to do it. You have to force their hand. Otherwise, they're never going to do it. By the way, one of the questions the last time I talked about this, before this bill was signed, is I wonder if the governor's going to walk this one back. Because it turns out Bob Ferguson, the governor of Washington, is Catholic. And maybe he feels bad about this. But guess what he said when he was asked if the confession rule gave him any pause? This is what he said. Keeping the confessional in the bill did not give Ferguson pause. Not for me, he said. As a Catholic, I'm very familiar with it. Been to confession myself. I felt this was important legislation for protecting kids. Yeah, this dude, this governor is like, I would rather protect kids than protect confession, which is the right answer to every ethical dilemma ever, right? So that's fantastic. Who else is mad about this? This is a statement that was put out by the Archdiocese of Seattle. There we go. And they have a very lengthy response to this bill. But I'm going to bring you to this part right over here, starting with while we remain committed to protecting minors. Stop right there. You're the Catholic Church. That is not what your commitment is. While we remain committed to protecting minors and all vulnerable people from abuse, does that include like trans people that you say don't exist, and gay people in marriages who you think should not be allowed to adopt from Catholic adoption agencies? But again, while we remain committed to all those people, priests cannot comply with this law if the knowledge of abuse is obtained during the sacrament of reconciliation. They have to call it that, because if they said, we can't comply with this law if we learn about abuse through the box that is over there, it sounds like you're insane. But when you make it sound like something out of Game of Thrones, you have to, take it seriously then. This is another thing. What else did they say here? With this law, the state of Washington is specifically targeting religious conduct by inserting the government into the Catholic tradition, namely the highly defined ritual of the sacrament of reconciliation. Again, if they just said, you guys, we have a box and we said it's a secret box, why are you making us violate the law of the sacred box? If they put it that way, you would say, the hell are you talking about? But because they make it sound mystical, they think everyone else should give them respect that they have not earned. Also, look, if you're saying the government is inserting itself into the Catholic tradition, and it's unfair for the government to stick itself in what the church's business is, well, then the church shouldn't be exempt from the government's laws either, because that's a special privilege for the church that it should not have. And then look at this. The law also attempts to supersede the code of canon law, which is them saying, how dare you make us follow your rules, because we have rules too, and they say abuse victims can suck it. Like, who cares what canon law says? I am not bound by canon law. You're not bound by canon law. The state of Washington is not bound by canon law. Who cares what canon law is? And think about this. What is the Catholic Church doing here? They are saying, here's why we don't care enough about children to protect them. Look at our rules. No one cares what your rules are. It's absurd. It's just a dumb argument to make in defense of sex predators that you want to defend. Right? Totally absurd. There is a time when it makes sense to push back against what you feel are unjust laws, right? If there is segregation under the law, then civil rights marches are an act of good trouble, as John Lewis famously said. These priests think they are going to be martyrs by not following this law. But you are not a martyr, and you are not causing good trouble if you are sacrificing children to preserve your made-up shit. Like, this is all of this. Everything you were hearing from the Catholic Church is a way of rationalizing something unethical. Because common sense would tell you protecting children from abuse is more important than keeping an abuser's secret. Just absurd that this The Catholic Church is making this argument. Like, I don't know, if the state fines me for driving above the speed limit, that violates my personal freedom to drive as fast as I want, but the state has an obligation to protect everyone in the community. And here the Catholic Church is insisting their religious beliefs, which should not matter outside of their personal, bubbles, it should override the communal need to protect children. I don't get it. Doesn't make any sense. But here's another thing. Now the Trump administration is getting involved with this. This is what the Department of Justice shared this week. The Justice Department announces First Amendment investigation into Washington State's new anti-Catholic law. They're calling it an anti-Catholic law. It is not. It is a law that protects children from child sex predators, and the Catholic Church wants to help the predators, and the Trump Department of Justice is calling this law anti-Catholic. It's not anti-Catholic unless you think Catholicism and, sex predators are on the same side. That is their implication, which is a weird thing to say. But this is what they pointed out after making an argument about religion. The Civil Rights Division, which who knew that still existed, the Civil Rights Division will investigate the apparent conflict between Washington State's new law with the free exercise of religion under the First Amendment, a cornerstone of the U.S. Constitution, which is surprising to me because I didn't know they gave a shit about the Constitution. But notice that they don't talk about kids here. They do not care about the children. They do not care about abuse victims. They are saying there's a conflict between their law and what we want to do, or what the Catholic Church wants to do, which again, I need to stress, is protecting predators. They don't want to say that, so they couch it in religious language. This bill demands that Catholic priests, let's read this until we get to the part where they say it has good intentions, it's trying to protect kids. It demands that Catholic priests violate their deeply held faith in order to obey the law. A violation of the Constitution and a breach of the free exercise of religion cannot stand under our constitutional system of government, said Harmeet Dillon, who, man, look at that Wikipedia page. She's not a good person. Worse, the law appears to single out clergy as not entitled to assert applicable privileges as compared to other reporting professionals. That is ChatGPT right there, because no humans talk that way. But again, I just want to point out, all they are saying here is, how dare you violate Catholic beliefs? But the beliefs they are trying to protect is, we got to make sure sex predators are protected. That's what the Catholic Church wants. Washington State Democrats said, no, we want to protect children. And all these people, these Republicans, are like, we got to make sure the Catholic Church can make a safe space for child sex predators. I don't know. Am I the only one seeing this? Again, clergy members are not singled out. They are mentioned in this bill specifically because they were exempt in the past, and now they are not. And like I said, other professionals are not bound by confidentiality when it comes to ongoing child abuse. It's weird that that's not even mentioned in any of this. A local newspaper asked Noelle Frame, who's the Democrat who sponsored this legislation, if she was surprised that the Trump administration is doing this investigation. This is what she said. I shouldn't be surprised that the Trump administration is launching an investigation into a law that seeks to protect children from child abuse and neglect. Right, because of course the Trump administration is going to protect the predators. No one should be surprised by that at all. Like, it would be far more compelling if the Catholic Church or the Trump administration, maybe you could make this argument if those institutions had a history of protecting children and protecting abuse victims, but neither one does. Like, the Catholic Church famously does not protect victims of abuse, and Republicans, they're actively spreading deadly viruses that hurt children while denying vaccine safety. And they voted for a guy who is a sex predator. So I don't know. They don't care about any of this stuff. The one silver lining to all this is that I really do believe the Trump administration gets more satisfaction out of putting out these press releases than actually doing anything. So right now, the Trump administration has not filed a lawsuit against the state of Washington. They haven't done anything to go after the law. I don't know if they will, because I think what they really want is to put out a press release like this where they make it sound like they're on the side of religious freedom, get the headlines that end up getting generated as a result of this, pat themselves on the back, and then ignore this because they don't give a shit about civil rights. They don't give a shit about religious freedom. So I don't know that they're actually going to do anything, or even if they try to file a lawsuit, maybe it doesn't stand up in court. But right now, they haven't done anything. Right now, it's all talk. The Freedom from Religion Foundation did issue a statement about this, defending the law, obviously, but this is what they said about it. The government has a compelling interest in protecting children from abuse. This is from Patrick Elliott. The law does not target Christianity or Catholicism. It applies equally to all clergy. Religious freedom does not include the right to conceal abuse. And the DOJ's position undermines both child safety and the Constitution it purports to defend. Look at the last line in the next paragraph. It is not anti-Christian to hold clergy accountable. It is pro-child, pro-justice, and pro-human rights. Couldn't be said any better than that. So I am so proud of Noelle Frame, who sponsored this legislation and got it done. This is the third time she's tried to pass this bill, and she got it done. And if you live in Washington, be sure to thank your Democratic representatives who voted for this bill. I'm thinking of Christiana de Leon, who might be watching this, who's a strong advocate and who spoke at some of those committee hearings in favor of this bill, and all the groups that worked to get this passed, despite knowing the Catholic Church was going to be mad about it, that the Trump administration would be mad about it, and especially thanks to the governor, Bob Ferguson, who signed this bill despite being a Catholic, knowing that it's in the best interest of children. So, there's not a lot of great political news these days, but this is a win-win situation for everyone except for all the people that want to protect sex predators.